For Creamer Media's Polity, I am Shannon. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss patriarchy in South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you.
You say that the law ought to put patriarchy on the defensive. Why is this so? And why do you still see gender equality and freedom of sexual orientation as unrealized?
Yes, it's a contradictory phenomenon. On the one hand, you have a gender-friendly constitution, one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, where gender equality is part of the Bill of Rights, freedom of sexual orientation is part of the Bill of Rights. But on the one hand, what is happening on the ground? Many men exercise their right to beat up their wives. For who can they, if they can't beat up their wives, who can they beat up? There's a sense that there's a sense of entitlement. What was interesting in the Court of Appeal the other day, when they declared that adultery was no longer an offence, they said it related to a sense of the man's proprietary right over his wife. Now, part of that proprietary right is that there's a Russian proverb saying you must sometimes shake the tree a bit. You can sometimes knock your wife around a bit. But it's not only wives. There are women in miniskirts who get stripped naked because it's allegedly contrary to customs. So you simply take it into your hands to go and do something like that. And we know that levels of gender-based violence in South Africa are very high. We are said to be one of our cities is said to be the rape capital of the world. Very high levels of rape. So gender-based violence is not adequately addressed through the policing system. Sometimes they say this is a family matter, it's not for us to deal with it. Or we've got very many cases where the police themselves take someone who's a rape complainant and rape them. So there's a very low rate of conviction, and there's a very low confidence in going to the police as a complainant. Very many people feel they are not treated with the necessary privacy. When doctors examine them, it's sometimes not with adequate respect. And the same goes for freedom of sexual orientation. It's probably worse in that even though it is part of the law, it is one of those things which is not part of the consciousness of many South Africans. Consequently, you get this, what is so-called corrective rape, where a lot of lesbians are raped to teach them that what they are really supposed to be is heterosexual, and many of them are murdered as well in very gruesome ways. And the level of policing and conviction in court is very low for this crime. So we have that situation where we don't have adequate consciousness around these rights compared with certain other rights.
When you speak of patriarchy sometimes being benevolent, are you not opening a gap through which one can undermine gender equality?
You see, what I was trying to say there is that the way in which patriarchy operates is not uniform. And we've got to understand even the history shows up different ways in which gender relations play themselves out. Now, in a situation where black men regarded themselves as emasculated, as not being able to do what a man should do, protect the home. Now, that notion of protecting the home in much feminist literature is seen as part of patriarchy, that the women are decorative, that men are chivalrous and they must defend them. But in South Africa, there was a real danger And Nelson Mandela says in his autobiography that he felt bad that he was not there as the head of the household to defend his family from attack. Now, they did face real attacks, real victimization. So we have to understand that the type of reference to protection that Mandela uses there, many other men use it of that period, is really a benevolent patriarchy. It's not a patriarchy that can be compared with treating your wife just as a doll or as someone who is a homemaker while you go and do heroic deeds. It's actually protecting from real threats. Now, why I raise this is that we have, when we apply gender categories, to look at the concrete conditions. Now, I'm not saying that everything in Africa is different from the West, but you can't take northern categories without applying them, without applying them in the conditions under which people operate. Even in the North, some feminists say some of the categories they get don't fit the relationships that they're studying. Now, many feminists in South Africa have said that women have protested under apartheid. They protested as mothers, and that was not a feminist thing, because in a sense they were recognizing the patriarchal nature of the relationship. However, when your home is under attack, you have to protect the home before you can talk about your relationships with your husband. You're actually facing bulldozers and all sorts of other things. So a lot of these phenomena, patriarchy must be understood in the plural. Notions of motherhood must be understood in more than one way, and feminism must be understood in the plural. There can be a number of ways of playing out feminism.
Now, you place a lot of weight on building social power behind the struggle to enforce gender equality and freedom of sexual orientation. Can you elaborate on that?
If you're racist against black people, you'll get charged with criminal injuria, etc., etc. If you're racist against whites, you'll have Solidarity, you'll have AfriForum, you'll spend a lot of time getting a senior counsel or whatever it is, depending on what you've done. So that behind certain rights in the Constitution, there is social weight. There is a constituency that backs them, which ensures that it's very hard to infringe on those rights. But in the case of gender equality and freedom of sexual orientation, there are the people concerned and a very limited number of organizations that back them. Now, in the 1980s, there were women's organizations, but when the ANC was unbanned, they deferred to the ANC and its Women's League, and many of them dissolved. Now, I think that was a mistake, because what you need is organized constituencies behind the people who are being victimized under gender-based violence. Now, in the case of LGBTI communities, there was not a developed organizational base until at the earliest, the late 1980s, because there was no legality that they could rely on. But since then, there are some organizations. There's one called OUT, and there's Gala, and a few others. But I think it's very important that we develop a situation where solidarity becomes a factor. The word fraternity, which means brotherhood, but in fact refers to something more than men connecting with one another. We need to have people who are potentially victimized feel that the rest of us recognize that freedom is indivisible, that an attack on the freedom of one is an attack on the freedom of all. Pastor Martin Niemöller said once in the Nazi period. When they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. When they came for the communists, I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. When they came for me, there was no one left to say anything. And I think we need to recognize that that is true of all freedom. We need to defend the freedoms of all our citizens.
Well, thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about South Africa's heritage of patriarchy.